12, and that's the additional harbour connections business case. Now, we've got Alistair Cribbins, David Hawkey, Chris Morgan. So Alistair Cribbins and David Hawkey are from Auckland Council. Chris Morgan is Group Manager Strategic Projects at Auckland Transport. And also the third partner is Waka Kotahi, and representing Waka Kotahi is the Design Portfolio Manager, Target Rapid Growth. I like that, Paul. Paul Glacina. Welcome, Paul. Look, I'll move this. Councillor Hills, would you like to second? Paul, at the outset, I think we've never really had the opportunity to acknowledge the Waka Kotahi for how it dealt with the bridge crash in such a quick manner. I got a sense, and Mayor has as well, of just how quickly and constructive you were in the response. I think 2 hours after that incident, I happened to be on an emergency call with Chair Adrian Young-Cooper, and I got a sense of your crisis management team. All so calm, all knew exactly what to do, because I've trained for it for many, many years. I would just want to, I think on behalf of all of us, acknowledge Waka Kotahi for the way you went about that, and quite swiftly. You met all the deadlines. You didn't overpromise, but you sure did deliver quick, smart. So please take that back from here at Auckland Council back to the team. We really do think you were top notch.
And all the workers and engineers and others.
Yeah, everybody involved. No, I think Mayor Goff has already conveyed that and conveyed it formally, I believe. But it's just sort of a reiteration that we would like to let you know of. Okay, Alistair, you've got a presentation. There's about 10 slides. The report's before us, and we're making progress.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. Yes, I've just got a short presentation. I'm conscious of how you've all been sitting here, so I'll try and keep it short, but I think it's useful because it will probably, I'm sure most of these points would come up in questions anyway, so hopefully they help to address some of those in advance. So yes, I'm here to present we are here to present the key findings and recommendations of the additional Waitemata Harbour Connections business case. It's due to be released tomorrow by Waka Kotahi, unless there's unforeseen delays, but hopefully not. This is a joint project with Auckland Council, Auckland Transport and Waka Kotahi. It was initiated primarily when the then Minister of Transport asked Waka Kotahi to provide advice on the need, timing, form and function of any new cross-harbour connections. So this was initiated to provide some quite detailed information. It was anticipated when we start this work we would be looking to land particular alignments, modes and the like. For reasons we'll touch on or get to, we haven't been able to get that far. There are too many uncertainties. We've uncovered too many interdependencies and difficulties with landing particular things at this time, but we think we've made some real progress on tying down and really delving into what we do and don't know and progressing sort of what we do know in this area. It has been focused across the harbour primarily, but is primarily the corridor is State Highway 1 and the Northern Busway, but we recognise that it has a wider, it's part of a wider transport network, so the study area covered an area from Silverdale all the way down to this central motorway junction. The problems that were identified through the business case project were around growth, productivity and resilience. The growth, essentially, population growth is occurring in Auckland and in the North Shore. This is leading to an increased demand for travel, which in turn is leading to increased congestion and will continue in the future, which will in time start to reduce the level of people's accessibility and travel choice. This has an impact on, particular during the middle of the day, on productivity and the movement of goods and services, and this can be seen in particular in the modelling over time as the two peaks, the AM and PM peaks, start to join over especially across the harbour and the harbour bridge, and so that in 20, 30 years time it's predicted that you'll have a peak period from sort of 6 AM through to 7 PM. It won't really drop off in the middle of the day. The resilience factor has probably been front of mind for many people over the past month or two, and this comes down to the fact that there's one single main corridor across the harbour. It's exposed to rare one-off events, as we had, but also over time it will be exposed to the increasing interventions that Waka Kotahi will need to make to maintain the bridge. There's no suggestion in Waka Kotahi that it will fall down or there's any problems with it, but over time Waka Kotahi, the Christmas closure of 2 lanes for a bit of resealing isn't going to cut it. They will need to undertake more and more serious interventions, which may require some closures for longer periods of time. So reliance on this single corridor becomes increasingly problematic. But in saying that, the business case and the project team felt that the main problem in this corridor is the increased growth. We know this is happening. It will impact every day in the future, not just in a 1 in 60 year, 1 in 100 year event. So the main focus and the main weighting of the problems has been on that growth and productivity problem. So the business case recommended a series of interventions following the hierarchy of Waka Kotahis. I'm still getting used to saying that. Intervention hierarchy. So that is starting with the lowest cost interventions first and working through to the most expensive ones, building a new crossing. So it starts with, in this case, recommending investigating land use planning and demand management interventions that may reduce the need or delay the need for us to upgrade the existing infrastructure or build new infrastructure. Secondly, and I'll touch on these in a bit more detail in the next few slides, upgrade the busway. This work is underway and we've got 2 people from AT here who can talk to that in more detail if there are any questions on that. Develop an additional rapid transit connection, and then finally, following all of that, improve the roading connectivity across in the corridor and in particular across the harbour. Quickly going in a little more detail, trying not to go into too much, there's an important link that the business case discovered, probably unsurprisingly, between the growth on the North Shore, which is largely focused north of Albany in the Greenfields area, and the need for investment. Also found that growth in and around centres and employment growth on the North Shore, which will help internalise some of the trips, would reduce demand and help delay the need for additional capacity across the harbour. In relation to road pricing, it doesn't resolve issues on its own, and that, to be honest, also goes for land use. Neither of these 2 interventions will solve this problem, but they will both help likely delay the need for investment. But while road pricing will delay the need for a road crossing, it is also likely to bring forward the need for a rapid transit crossing. So it sort of gives with one hand, takes with another around the timing of things. In relation to the busway, the business case found there was an urgent need to add capacity to the busway to meet ongoing growth in cross-harbour travel demand and support mode shift. Now, this was pre-COVID that most of this work was done. It's probably been a slight delay. It's probably not quite so urgent now, but at the moment, I believe we're still working, assuming that things will return to normal in the next few years. And so there is still, we think, an urgent need to progress this work, at least the investigation. And so this was felt it was so urgent that AT has already got this detailed business case underway and started with this work. But even then, if we undertake all these enhancements, it's still likely that the busway will reach capacity around to the mid to late 2030s. And at this point, we're likely to need to have a larger intervention, which the business case found that a rapid transit connection across the harbour was the best option to address the issues and objectives, those issues that we covered before, and therefore should be the priority investment. The work looked at a wide range of modes and routes. The preferred approach that the business case landed on was an additional rail-based cross-harbour connection serving the lower North Shore with stations at Takapuna and Smales Farm, likely extending further north, potentially following the existing busway corridor, but potentially not. Further work needs to be done on that. Further work also needs to be done on the particular mode, whether it's light rail, light metro, heavy rail. And a lot of this relies on integration with other work that's underway. City centre to Mangere, supporting growth north of Albany, northwest rapid transit, integration of all of these, and there's a lot of interdependencies with that work. What is it connecting to and what's happening there? Even with that in place, there are some residual issues, or it doesn't fully address all the issues that were identified and problems that were identified in the business case. There is still increasing inter-peak congestion, which will continue to impact on productivity. And there is obviously the resilience issue. While that is partially solved by the rapid transit connection, in that more people can use this alternative route. If one is impacted, then many people can use the alternative route, being it by bus or car on the bridge, or road connection, or rapid transit if there's an issue with the road crossing. Obviously, goods and services and some other personal travel can't happen that way and will need to happen by car. So there are still issues with that. So the business case recommended that continual work is undertaken on this to identify the the alignment of this and to protect that in the future. In relation to a tunnel versus a bridge, the business case did not land on an answer to this. There's a clear preference for a tunnel for both the road and rapid transit and road. However, there is, as you'll have seen in your report, quite a significant cost with that. And so while it is preferred, we did not feel comfortable ruling it out completely. The strong advice we got from both legal and planning advice was that it would be very, very hard, if not impossible, to consent a tunnel in this environment. Bridge, sorry. It would probably be pretty difficult to do the tunnel, but yes, sorry, it would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do a bridge. But we didn't feel comfortable ruling it out because of the scale of the cost involved. Whether it's a combined rapid transit and road tunnel or bridge needs to be considered at the next stage. We need to do more work on what the rapid transit connection is. We only reached an indicative alignment. There are, as I said, a lot of unknowns with what it's connecting into at either end. And the preferred alignment for that, we need to take that and the preferred mode, look at it with the preferred alignment for a road crossing, see if those work timing-wise and spatially, and if so, they could potentially be investigated to be combined. If not, it's likely to be separate tunnels, or separate crossings, but that needs to be done at the next stage. These are the next steps. We recommend, or the business case recommends, ongoing delivery of the busway enhancements. It then also recommends progressing on to what is being called a strategic network single stage business case. I've sort of touched on what that involves. Further work on the rapid transit connection, so we get quite a level of detail on the preferred option for that. Taking that to the work that's previously been done by what was NZTA, Waka Kotahi, and looking at both the rapid and road connections, figuring out the best way to deliver those together, apart, different times, and protect both of those routes, or the single route. Public engagement is proposed to occur as part of that, or at the same time as that business case. And because of the interdependencies I've mentioned around these various rapid transit connections, we being these three partners, have already started work on a rapid transit plan. It was felt that it wasn't possible to leave this to any one particular project to make the decisions that impact on all the various other routes. So there is work underway on a rapid transit plan that will look to answer, or at least provide guidance for these rapid transit planning decisions, and will hopefully tie into this, as well as tie into decisions on city centre to Mangere and other transit routes. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Paul, from the Waka Kotahi side and AT side, either Daniel or Chris, anything to add?
Nothing in terms of content. I'll just confirm that this, program was endorsed by our board last month, I believe, and Auckland Transport's last month as well.
That's correct, yep, thank you. And I believe the motions that the respective boards passed are very similar to our motions, acknowledging where we're up to and the next stages and who will be involved in that stage. And it's good to see the representation here today of Auckland Council. While holding the pen on the report for us, we know that is being authored jointly in some ways with Waka Kotahi and Auckland Transport, and that is the way forward. Members, I did alert the directly affected boards of this paper, the Waitemata board, Kaipātiki board and the Devonport board. In fact, the email went out to every board, so every board received it. I did extend an invitation to those board chairs, the three directly affected, to attend the meeting today, but look, I haven't got any feedback to date. But on that note, Alistair, you will be, on behalf of Auckland Council, you'll be bringing the affected boards, or the directly affected boards, up to pace on it, in the new year or December?
We're hoping to touch base pretty much in the next few days, this week, next week, to try and arrange a time, hopefully before Christmas, to meet with those local boards.
Well done. Okay. Questions? Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you very much, and it's great to see this finally taking shape. So thank you very much for that. My questions, I guess, and it's always come up through the last couple of years when we've discussed this, is that Takapuna spur, and I'm glad the thinking is now that it won't replace the busway on the busway. I couldn't imagine 5 years without the busway, or 10 years, however long it is taken to make. But are you ruling out, or have you ruled in other scenarios? Like, apart from Takapuna being a metro, the actual population growth and the current much larger population is actually on the western side of the motorway, and the carriageways, say I'm not trying to pick or choose, but say an on-street, you've got Glenfield Road, Wairoa Road, Taharoto, you've got Lake Road, Northcote Road, all with very wide carriageways that potentially could take other routes. And when you look at Northcote, especially, if it's just abutting Smales Farm Station, there's a massive golf course on one side, which doesn't give you So I guess for my, talking about the rapid transit, is there thinking of being a bit creative of where the population growth actually is? Without precluding maybe going to Takapuna too, but I'm just wondering, is that all being thought of?
That is definitely not off the table. We are conscious of the need to integrate the land use planning and the response to this, and at this stage the business case recommends going via Takapuna to try and link that in and help support and internalise that business growth on the North Shore, and link Takapuna into a lot of that residential growth, especially north of Albany, and so they actually have a direct link in there, helping support that, and also obviously providing that link from Takapuna into the city and connecting it in there. But that is not, we haven't ruled anything else off the table, and it will need to be looked at the next stage. That definitely has come up, the width of those roads on the western side compared to most of Auckland, let alone the eastern side of the motorway. So that will be definitely something we're looking at and testing in the next phase.
Thank you. And I guess, will all the other connections, like cycle connection, like it's been done with the Northern Corridor, which actually seamlessly connects everything finally, cycling, walking, will that all be taken into consideration, not left up to, say, local boards to try and fit in cycle routes into... I guess I'm just thinking of Northern Corridor as a good model where you have actually linked everything up.
Oh yeah, it's probably getting a bit too detailed at the moment. I think I expect we would take the same approach that we have for Northern Corridor and NZTA have taken, have taken with other corridors such as down south and the Southern Motorway and the like as well.
I guess my experience has been it's harder to put stuff in after it's not there. Like, I'd love it to sort of be there. The other question was around road and future road, and I guess it obviously makes sense to have public transport first, but how early will you be able to talk through with the community about what road really means, such as how much land you may need to take up and where those cars will come in, flooding the city or flooding the shore or taking away many homes to, because I guess people may just think you're talking about over the water, a few more lanes, sweet as, but we know that you actually need a lot more motorway north and south somewhere.
And local roads as well, probably. There's no point just widening the motorway because the local road connections are congested. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add, but I definitely see that happening at the next stage. That is the type of detail we're looking at getting into the next stage, and as I think it says in the report, that's anticipated to happen over the next year or so.
I guess my concern is if you're not a little bit... I guess if you count everything in again, then it gives people more of an understand. I just want to be sure that people understand at a high level what it could mean, to have several new lanes of road within our communities. First up, because, you might pick or choose your assumptions without knowing actually, that reserve's gone, much like we saw with the Northern Corridor, unfortunately, or those homes are gone, much like Mill Road and others. So, thank you.
plus the emissions enabled by that. Councillor Walker, please.
Yeah, just got a couple of questions. I appreciate the work you're doing on enhancing the busway. Does that mean that you're also looking at the potential of enhancing the feeder network that feeds into the busway? Because the busway by itself, unless you've got much expanded park and rides, is only one part of the network. The other question I've got is is around whether you're also looking at enhancing the ferry service, and quite obviously that is hugely resilient in terms of sea level rise, for example, and I don't doubt that's something that you're factoring in, and also walking and cycling, but more particularly as far as cycling is concerned, the massive growth of e-bikes as they go to shifting people over distances.
Who would like to take those three questions?
Sorry, I was taking notes. So the busway enhancements will include the buses that come onto the busway, a lot of station improvements. It's wherever the problems and the constraints are. So if that's running along the busway, if it's at stations, or if it's getting to the busway itself, all of those are on the table. It's not just the State Highway 1 part, it's all parts of the busway network. Ferries, there is separate parallel work going on to develop the ferry service into the future. It's not part of this work, but it's being done at the same time. And e-bikes is part of the kind of integrated approach. It's part of the Northern Pathway thinking that will be added into this. So all of those modes and all of the development of those will be taken into account in the next phase we're getting into.
Just one related question. You're probably aware that the council is actively looking at selling the airspace above our park and rides prior to, of course, any of this work being done. Is that something of concern to you, given that we might need to have more park and ride or other facilities to cater for the integration of what we're talking about here?
We'll be looking at the long-term implications of each of the airspace considerations when we look at park and rides. The first starting point is ORAK, so it's not affected by this. And in fact, the northern busway stations aren't prioritised in that plan either. So
we're not selling the airspace above our North Shore park and rides tomorrow then?
not tomorrow, no.
Okay.
Or the next, no, not the next day, I don't think so.
It is of real concern. So I'm just putting that to you that, I mean, we've had presentations around selling it, and I don't know whether...
We've taken a presentation on what's called overstation development, looking at the potential. That's what we've looked at, and we've not landed on selling anything, actually. But look, thank you for your interpretation of the situation, Councillor Walker. Councillor Sibso, please.
That's what made the whole idea so attractive. Richard's kind of asked my question. So you don't really know where it's going to come out?
No.
And I mean, both ways, north-south. You don't actually know where it's going to join up?
Yeah. At this level of detail, no. It's more indicative. Yeah.
Okay, so the devil really is in the detail, isn't it, on that one? Yeah, okay, thanks.
And Councillor Watson?
Yeah, just probably pay to touch base with two other local boards who might not physically be affected, but will definitely rely on the Harbour Bridge, and that's of course Upper Harbour and Hibiscus and Bays. You know, a large percentage of the people there commute over the bridge. Just in terms of these, and I'm looking at the kind of the work program or the future work program, and you've identified the Northern Busway enhancements. What I'm really interested in trying to get some sense of what are the enhancements beyond what's currently occurring. So we've got the Northern Motorway Improvements Projects, which is extending the busway, adding a station at Rosedale, and then we have the possibility of going up to Orewa penciled in. So specifically beyond that program, what are the other significant works you're anticipating?
Sure. So Those are likely to include station improvements, lengthening the platforms and get more buses to arrive and serve customers all at the same time. You might gate the stations much like you gate a train station so that people can tag on as they arrive at the station and just hop straight on a bus, so there's no delay tagging onto a bus, so they can go through quicker. Filling in the connections along the busway. There are some gaps there that they're running in the motorway traffic or along the shoulder. On the city centre end, we can improve Fanshawe Street in the way that they come to downtown or up to midtown, and then as you mentioned, you can go up beyond Albany, up towards Silverdale. So there's parts of the network you can operate faster and better and get more through, and that will be staged over time. It isn't a one-off. There'll be bits that will improve over years.
Okay, all right, thank you. And just in terms of that, that sort of planning or integrated planning and across the board, with the ferry strategy as it stands at the moment, and I'm just looking at the overall timeline that's involved here and the lead-in times and this kind of notion of sort of making do in the interim before we actually get some sort of crossing decision. So with the ferries, there seems to be a little bit of a kind of a hole there in terms of really getting some of these services going in a way that would significantly affect the number of people that are using them. So, and I think particularly at places like Gulf Harbour, conceivably some of the other stops on the shore. I don't know what it looks like at Birkenhead, for instance. There's no ferry service at Northcote at the moment. So what's the degree of immediacy there? Because we've been talking about this for quite some time, but there doesn't sort of seem to be too much in the way of a step change that this kind of future work program alludes to.
Chris, in replying to that, can you, or Daniel, but possibly Chris, reflect on where you're up to on the ferry procurement strategy? Because that is probably the gap that Councillor Watson's referring to.
Yeah, so we are working on a piece of work specifically aimed at ferry, and it'll look at the whole strategy, the ownership model, the operation. If we think about ferry in the context of what this is trying to do, the rapid transit network really carries a lot of people, and ferry really isn't that kind of high capacity mode. So while it serves some demand, it doesn't go anywhere near serving the demand that we're talking about here.
Yes, important nonetheless in that interim time period where a small number can have a disproportionate effect on the network. Just the final point to make is really just to reinforce the notion that was alluded to my colleague in terms of the park and rides, that the park and rides have been overwhelmingly successful, as you're no doubt aware, but they are in areas of tremendous growth, and they are in areas where the main access is still by vehicle, and that's not going to change. And I see that some of the areas where we assume that there might have been park and rides, like Milldale, as I understand it, is not now the case. So that's going to put increased strain on those facilities, irrespective of what feeder services might be working elsewhere. So I think that's an important point, because council, as is sometimes the case, is moving into initiatives, if you can call them that conceivably affect some of these plans that you're making.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And Mayor Goff, please.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just two questions. This project is eye-wateringly expensive, between $6 and $18 billion. I presume that the rapid transit network side of it, as a project of national significance, will be fully funded by central government. I'd just like you to confirm that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Somebody got a recorder working.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I'll just confirm that the financial case component is going to be a significant part of the next phase, including trying to shrink that range a bit, so it is all pretty ballpark at the moment. But it's as you've noticed, it's a very big investment, and it'll be quite a step change to fund something like this which will require us to think quite differently.
And the answer to my question was?
I think I bypassed it.
Well, I'm looking at it seriously. What I'm presuming is that the enhanced busway might involve coming out of ATAP funds, but I'm imagining that, just like the Harbour Bridge was built out of national funds and motorway systems are, that this would be within that category. I mean, if it isn't, we're probably all wasting our time because we don't have those billions of dollars that you'd be looking for. But when would we have some certainty around how that fund, obviously we'd have certainty around what the funding quantum is, and these will be on the low side by the time we get there. But when will you have when will we have some discussion with central government over commitments to pay what?
So I guess that's a question we don't have a precise answer to, but the next phase of work is kind of what we need to move to start being able to have an informed conversation. Yep. So it is a process of kind of stepping through a few key decisions, and I do, again, I think understanding the quantum, the timing, yep. they are quite significant questions we need to have a bit more detail to start progressing those conversations. So I think in answer your question, we probably are talking about 1 to 2 years away before we're in that space.
Okay, and timing was my second question. We look likely maybe to complete the rapid transit network within about 15 years. Are you confident that existing systems can sustain growth from now until that point, and what gives you that confidence?
Sorry, that's really the work that the busway enhancements business case is looking at. It's looking at the level of investment that we'll need to put into it to keep to get the busway to that point. The other trade-off is, as Alistair alluded to, road pricing. So if we implement road pricing, then the investment time comes forward. So we need to think about that carefully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And Councillor Fletcher, please.
Oh, thank you. My question is probably a follow-on from the Mayor's, and it's just I'm trying to understand in a sequential sense how the individual componentry will come together. So ATAP isn't a statutory document. It's a bit, to a degree, it's a bit like the old days where you had the mayoral forum, but it's, so you've got a sort of nominated amount that's agreed after negotiation, but it does involve, with Waka Kotahi, the board's determination in terms of allocation of their funds. So like if you go back into the old days, it used to be TransFund. So what I'm trying to work out is how the individual pieces of the jigsaw are going to be signed off. Oh. So what I kind of see at the moment is these are all decisions by the board. I mean, obviously subject to the estimates in Parliament and the allocations and everything else that go through there. Can you just walk me through how it's approved? Because we always miraculously say, oh, well, it's part of ATAP, and but ATAP is.
Yeah, well, I can speak to that and help that a bit. I think in terms of, I suppose, the immediate needs, which is the busway enhancements, that sort of package of works, the cost of that is in the ATAP process, and it's being assessed through that process. So that will be the first look at. And that will inform the regional land transport plan, which would put that forward for also co-funding from the national sort of transport fund. So that part is the clearer part of the story. And when you're moving to these second, more major interventions, as Paul has indicated, that's where further work and a bigger discussion we'll have to have, because the size of those potential investments are quite substantial inside, up to 30 to 50% of the National Land Trans Fund to do the whole lot. So it's moving into a different sort of conversation. But the process is clear for that more immediate intervention around the busway enhancements.
So are there signals from that board thus far Obviously, everyone's waited to have electoral outcomes.
Well, I sit on the ATAP steering group, so the part of the the program that's put forward to ATAP includes the busway enhancements program. So that around about 500 million is in the envelope of things that could be done, and that's been looking at. So there's determinations on that. So it's been discussed, and then I suppose the second part of that story will be through the regional land transport plan, where AT would indicate its need for that to be put forward for funding and other works. So that's the sort of process for that initial piece of work.
Thank you. I can see the importance of the advocacy that the Mayor and others may provide, but yeah, it's just to there's like dominoes, you sort of get them all trying to go in a row.
And AT can speak to this, but I'm well aware that the board thinks the busway hunt is a very important project, and it's a high priority project for the AT board.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Hills, one more.
Yeah, I guess the short term, and people are, impatient, but obviously a large amount of money is, hard to pay for. So I guess in the short term, how do we do more like we're trying to do in the northwest, but on this corridor in the short term? So it was pretty awesome to see that extra bus way on the left-hand side past St Mary's Bay, things like that, that could make all the difference if it was permanent. How do you work with AT? I mean, you are AT, but how do we work together to get more bus access to on-ramps and things like that? Like, it just seems these things sometimes take long, and then every now and then we go bam, like the extra bus shoulder stuff in the North Shore that kind of happened overnight, it felt like. How do we ensure more of that can be done in the short term? That makes a huge difference. It might be that 3 extra minutes at either end of the day, which obviously all adds up, I guess. And then that's the capacity, and we can use more buses because they can get there faster, etc. Are we thinking innovatively for the next 5 or 6 years?
So there was a workshop actually this afternoon that I've missed because I've been here on the Fanshawe section about what options we've got to do exactly what you're talking about, more creative ways of using the same space. So when all of that work lands, which is meant to be December, we will have a package, and it will have some really short-term, quick paint and signs things, and some more expensive things. So I imagine we'll be coming to you early the new year with, here's the program, here are the quick wins, things like you mentioned, and here's the longer term things. Just one point of clarification perhaps for Councillor Fletcher. There are already in ATAP in the second and third decades already indications for the rapid transit and the road crossing. They're already there, they're just second and third decades, so there's less clarity. What we're trying to do is provide the clarity to say, well, actually it's this much in this time frame. So although ATAP is a tool to guide all of our funding.
It doesn't bind legally.
It doesn't bind us, but it's already ring fenced that there's big dollars coming, and this work will help say to do what and when and prioritise that. And then as we get closer and closer, those conversations that Paul was mentioning about who has responsibility for what will come about. But the 30-year ATAP does have these components in it already, but no one's really too focused on the second and third decades yet because we've still got a lot to get through in the coming decade.
It's very refreshing to see this work coming on, though. It's very exciting.
Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. And just the last bit, there was 300 million in ATAP at some point, I feel like it was 2018, for shoulder lanes or some investigation from Albany to Silverdale. And obviously that will improve the whole network because fewer cars potentially coming from Wayne and John's Way. Is that still part of the mix in the later of this decade?
Yes, so that includes, so the busway improvements include the entirety of the busway up to Silverdale, Rewa, I guess. So we're including that bus shoulder running north of Albany as one of the options, and not forgetting that Penlink is in there too. And we'll need to find a station around Penlink for the Whangaparoa community as well.
Thank you. Look, just a few questions from me. Another one, Councillor Watson, go for it.
And it's just a bit of a left field one, but it's one that I hear in my ward numbers of time, and it goes to that interim period and the ferry. And I know you said that it's not necessarily numerically a large number, but one of the questions we do hear a lot is from people like in Browns Bay and around Takapuna, in fact, that are undergoing quite significant intensification under the unitary plan. So you have a lot of big, relatively high-rise buildings going in there, as to some sort of ferry or something perhaps a little more futuristic that would enable those communities to hook up to a ferry-type service, whatever that might be. Is there any work going on into that at all, or not?
So the ferry work we're looking at is about the current network and then developing that, but also what would happen next. So where would the next services be? We often get proposals for a Browns Bay or a St Heliers service. Those have been looked at in the past. I think that's all part of how much effort we want to put into ferries, what type of ferries. Electric ferries is something we want to move towards. How do we get the infrastructure? It's often the land side infrastructure that's the problem. Being able to build wharves and things in the coastal marine area is difficult. And then your relative cost for moving people from Browns Bay on a ferry versus on a bus, because it's very expensive to move people by ferries compared to being on a bus, even if the travel time is different. So the ferry work that Chris mentioned before is going to land all of that. So how we run ferries, where we run them, and how much effort and expense and investment is needed in that.
Just would say I think there's no more additional costs on the gradients on the sea, Mr. Chair. I'd just say they're pretty much cost competitive with how they were 150 years ago, I think.
I used to think that too, but if you talk to Auckland Transport, the operating costs on water are enormous. But maybe with a ferry procurement strategy and an electric fleet, which is what is being considered, those operating costs might come down. But let's see, that procurement strategy is being worked on, and I think we'll see it in the new year sometime, won't we, Chris? Look, just following up on the question of the Mayor tried to get you in writing there, Brett, so, and you avoided putting it in writing. But the free money always comes with consequential expenditure that the city has to bear. And I don't think, we all need to recognise that there is always consequential spend. It's just the level of the consequential spend. So one of the areas of consequential spend that it doesn't seem to be accounted for in the road connections, which is really stage 4. And I'm delighted to see the priority for enhancement, and then rapid transit, and then road connection. But the road connection, looking at around 10 billion if it was a tunnel road connection. My understanding from reading the material is that it doesn't substantially reduce congestion, and it doesn't substantially improve travel times. Is that correct?
So I think when we look at this as a program, the way I'd summarise it is the target for moving people quickly has been through rapid transit, and in particular focusing on peak hour trips. That has been through the investment in either the busway upgrade or rapid transit. I think what the program is showing is even with that level of intervention and investment, in particular in the interpeaks and the counter peaks on the roading network, we're continuing to see basically all day congestion. So what that brings with it is a much more fragile network. So if there's an incident, there is no basically ability for the wider strategic transport network to recover. So what the roading investment in particular is looking to try and address is the ability to provide that interpeak, counter-peak mobility. it's not targeting increased peak hour journeys in terms of a focus into the city or beyond. So that would be the way I'd kind of summarise what that component of the program is looking to address.
Yeah, look, and I'm probably coming on the lead of Councillor Hills, his questions about the transparency and just really telling people what they are likely to get and not get, because my reading of the report is, you know, that the road crossing will not substantially alleviate congestion or improve travel times. It's in writing there. And I think we just need to be honest about that. You know, you can spend $10 billion, but you won't get, you know, a 10-minute ride to the city. The other thing about that, you know, consequential spend is that 10 billion for a road crossing, which is admittedly well down the track after the rapid transit connection. My understanding is that 10 billion has not costed the widening of the feeder roads, because it would need widening of feeder roads. You can't just have a widening of the state highway system. Now, that state highway system, if it was to be widened, it would have to compromise historic Smith's Bush, for example, because there is no room there. Something would have to give. Councillor Hills talked about housing, but that's heritage bush. So I imagine that would be compromised. I also imagine that the cost, or I can't see the cost in that 10 billion of any so-called widening to the feeder roads like Curran, Spaghetti Junction, let's see, Northcote Road, Esmond Road, Oniwa Road, Constellation, Tristram, etc. All those roads would have to be improved to get the best out of the so-called upgraded road connection. Is that correct?
So I think the point is a very clear one for both the roading and rapid transit components. Let's say we've got a clear program and we understand the key moves within it, but for both of those networks we need to do further work around them as networks, and that in particular is, I guess, less defined for the rapid transit component. We have had done more thinking around the strategic roading network as part of previous studies, but both of those networks, I guess, need to come up to a similar level of understanding so we can start to layer them on top of each other and actually understand how they'll operate as a network, and then spatially what the requirements might be. So we haven't got all those answers yet. There is, within those, with all those cost ranges, they are at a very high level, and we have built in some assumptions around wider investment in the network, but none of them at a level that you would be confident in.
So there is understandably a risk of, you know, quite considerable consequential spend by the local roading authority, which is Auckland Transport, funded by Auckland Council. But it's good to just be clear about that at the outset. Look, I'm mindful of time. There's one other query that I have. People were very exercised about, you know, the need for the additional harbour crossing when a container toppled off a truck and took the bridge out. But of course, we sort of lost sight of other resilience issues that have been before us for some time now. And I'm referring to, and it's referred to in the report, is the lack of resilience due to flooding and sea level rise on the section between Oniwa and Esmond. And that is right before us right now. And while we have, you know, a very clear program of works here, going from busway enhancements, rapid transit, and then possibly road crossing, how important, Paul, is it to raise the level of the motorway more immediately to provide resilience from flooding currently, that we're getting currently, and lanes are closed, and that will only be exacerbated by sea level rise through to 2050 and beyond?
So I think the quick answer would be it's not an imminent issue in terms of priority. So we do have a national program around resilience hotspots. This is a very well identified one. We had done some work that's, I believe we were looking around 2030s. So kind of similar timeframes to what we're talking about here is when we would want to have a response in place. And I think there's a number of issues here that are all overlapping in the same area, which is why that thinking will very much be part of this next phase, and it needs to be put on top of the operational issues, as the capacity issues, resilience issues. They all do again need to be layered, but it's not a project we think needs to start now. We do have some thinking around sea level rise and when that might be more imminent.
Okay, thank you. Look, lots more questions, but I think I'll leave it with Councillor Simpson to ask the last ones.
Thank you. Just very quickly, is the resolution B clear in the fact that you are not, we're going to be involved, but at the moment there's no talk of budget from our end? I'm just saying, we want to be involved, but I just want to make sure that the intent is quite clear.
Yeah, Paul, do you just on that, so ATAP and the RL2P, I identified it was some $61 million for the initial work. I gather you got balance to that budget?
The future ATAP. So in this this current investigation, it's been jointly funded between Auckland Transport and Waka Kotahi. So Auckland Council via Auckland Transport has contributed, but not directly as a party. We are between AT, ourselves, and Auckland Council, we still need to confirm the cost shares for the next components, but at this stage we haven't had any Auckland Council direct funding.
I get
And it's
that.
not
I
been
just
requested
suppose
now,
that,
as far as I'm aware.
there'll come a point, right? And I just kind of want to know when that point.
Yeah.
And I think I'll take the absolute last, Councillor Henderson.
Sorry, Chair, I was mulling over to whether to ask this or not, and I may as well. Yeah, if we're looking at rapid transit to the North Shore, and obviously an additional harbour crossing has been looked at. Have we looked at using the Upper Harbour Highway that already exists instead and linking it to the busway? That's surely going to be cheaper.
So that's an and, not an or. So there are long-term plans for the State Highway 18. So it's basically Henderson to Constellation Rapid Transit Network. Might be busway, might be something else. Who knows? But that's a later one. You got to get your North Shore stuff sorted, get your Northwest stuff sorted, and then the 18 corridor. If you look on the ATAP plans, it's on there, and that's not instead of. That's as well as in the future for supporting that growth and the travel demand along that corridor as well.
I do appreciate the answer, but I just have no idea how we'd pay for even a kilometre of it, let alone, goodness me, I'm stunned.
Okay, look, I think we've asked the questions. There's probably a lot more to... Anybody want to make any comments? There's a moved and seconded motion there. Are we complete? Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks for picking up my election policy of 2013, 16 and 19. Thanks for looking at the graphic. The station in Takapuna, you saw the graphic there. Thank you. Appreciate that. You're a little bit of a lag, but I'm appreciative. Okay, we'll close the meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair.
Got to move. This is moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Then we've got item 13. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Bartley. Councillor Simpson seconded. And that is just to acknowledge the memos, etc. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. No extraordinary business. And we are closed. Thank you, members.